As a woman who wrote or co-wrote over 60 produced films, a producer who championed strong female roles, and a Hollywood insider with a career spanning over 3 decades, Jane Murfin may be one of the most prolific but least known writers of the 1920s and 30s. Jane Murfin was born Jane Macklem in Quincy, Michigan in 1884. Quincy has a population of just under 2,000 people and is classified as a village. The area was first settled by Horace Wilson, who first purchased land in 1830. He purchased 360 acres of land from the government. John Cornish became the first permanent resident when he built his house here in 1833. The area would be set aside from Coldwater Township and organized as Quincy Township in 1836. The township and community were named Quincy on the suggestion from Dr. Hiram Allen, who recently moved to the area from Quincy, Massachusetts. A post office named Quincy began operating on December 16, 1836. The Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railway built a depot in Quincy, and the community incorporated as a village in 1858. Quincy is known by the Chicago Road running through it. Murfin, like many American women, attended college and trained as a teacher. Instead of working in education, however, she fell into acting, and from acting, she fell into a writing collaboration that lasted her entire life. Murfin's first role in a touring production of The Music Master in 1904 led to meeting her lifelong friend and collaborator, Jane Cowl, who also acted in the play. Her first marriage, in 1907, to lawyer James Murfin at the age of 23, lasted less than 5 years, but Jane adopted his surname and would use it, excluding the brief period in the late 1910s when she and Jane Cowl used the pseudonym Alan Langdon Martin throughout her life. As some of their early plays concerned World War I, they chose to use a male pseudonym, Alan Langdon Martin. But when Joseph M. Schenck purchased their play Smilin through 1932 as a starring vehicle for his wife, actress Norma Talmadge, they used their own names on the screenplay. Much like What Price Hollywood. The film was such a success it was remade as a talkie in 1934, starring Norma Shearer, Frederick March and Leslie Howard, and again in 1941 with Jeanette MacDonald and Jean Raymond. Although the 1910 U.S. Census records list her as living as a housewife in Michigan with her lawyer husband James, according to Murfin family correspondence from 1967, Jane moved to New York City while her husband remained in Michigan. Perhaps she lived with friend Jane Cowl there. According to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, James eventually became a school regent after a long career teaching law, and even has a gate on the grounds named after him. In an undated typed letter written by Jane Cowl, she describes Murfin as the best friend any person could hope to have. See Cowl Papers, Box 2, Folder 8. The two collaborated on a series of plays in the late teens, including the popular and often revived World War I theatrical melodramas Lilac Time, 1917, and Smilin through 1919. Lilac Time starred Colleen Moore, who you can learn about on this channel. Evidence of their business savvy, the two retained the rights to Smilin through. According to a 1931 Los Angeles Times article exposing what writers in the industry during the silent era made, Joseph Schenck auctioned the play for $22,500 in 1920, $350,000 today, as a vehicle for his wife Norma Talmadge, see Charlotte K7. The two women later resold the dialogue rights to Schenck while retaining the rights for radio and TV adaptations, according to a series of financial documents exchanged between Cowl and her attorney, see Cowl Papers, Box 2, Folder 5. Murfin and Cowl's early Broadway collaborations, which starred Cowl, were credited to Alan Langdon Martin, as the two thought Broadway producers would take their work more seriously if they believed a man had written it. Though this ruse may have initially helped to get Lilac Time produced in 1917, they later regretted their scheme as the play continued to be credited to the non-existent Martin, long after Cowl and Murfin had gained fame as dramatists, which is clear from Jane Cowl's correspondence with her attorney, see Cowl Papers, Box 2 Folder 5. Murfin's first motion picture scenario, Marie, Limited, was written and produced in 1919 by Adolph Zucker's Select Pictures Corporation in New York. Shortly after, Murfin relocated to California and made the transition from writing plays to writing primarily for film. She excelled in snappy, witty dialogue. She wrote scenarios for films during the mid-1920s, primarily romantic comedies and a few dramas. In 1924, she wrote, co-directed, and co-produced Flapper Wives, a May Allison drama about faith healing adapted from an unproduced Murfin and Cowl play called The Flaming Sign. She was credited by name on film advertisements, thoroughly defeating the myth that women didn't work in Hollywood until feminism. But Murfin's biggest success in the 1920s was writing scenarios for her dog, Strongheart. In a 1925 Los Angeles Times article, Murfin claims that her European representative purchased Strongheart. That representative was Laurence Trimble, a dog trainer and early director for Vitagraph Studios. Trimble began his film career directing Jean, the Vitagraph dog, a beautiful collie and the first canine to have a leading role in motion pictures. Trimble was 1 year Murfin's junior. Trimble moved to England in 1912 to direct Vitagraph films starring John Bunny. According to unsubstantiated sources, Murfin met Trimble in New York and followed him to London in 1912, which ended his relationship with his first wife, opera singer Louise Trenton. Murfin would return to New York later in 1912, while Trimble would return a few years later at the onset of World War I. While visiting Germany just after the end of World War I, Trimble purchased a German attack dog christened Etzel von Oehringer. One has to remember German was one of the main languages of America until the 1930s, and there were German newspapers from San Francisco to Philadelphia. One also has to remember that German soldiers found themselves picking up abandoned German shepherd dogs across the fields and farms of France and Germany during World War I. This is how Rin-Tin-Tin got his start, for example. The influx of German shepherd dogs changed the dog landscape in the United States, which was dominated by American bully breeds and American foxhounds, the first bred by Washington himself. The 20th century shift to include German shepherds is a similar shift to the Portuguese water dog craze, which started with the Obama's adoption of that breed during their time in office. In 1921, Murfin and Trimble formed Trimble Murfin Productions as a vehicle to produce films for the newly renamed Strongheart dog. Strongheart became the first true canine star of cinema, predating fellow German shepherd star Rin-Tin-Tin by 2 years. He was billed as the best dog in the world. Creating the Strongheart franchise allowed Murfin to move into directing by co-directing Brawn of the North, 1922, with Trimble. The Strongheart franchise proved so popular, it spawned a dog food that was available into the early 2000s even though the dog and Murfin were long gone. Murfin did not abandon dramas, however. Other writing collaborators included Anita Loos on the 1939 classic The Women and Aldous Huxley on Pride and Prejudice, 1940, and Harry Ruskin on Andy Hardy's Private Secretary, 1941. While there is no firm record that the couple Murfin and dog trainer Trimble ever married, none of the articles in the Los Angeles Times or the New York Times ever refer to them as a romantic couple, and often refer to Murfin as living alone. But by 1921, according to Trimble and Trenton's daughter Jan Trimble Zoliakis, Trimble and Murfin traveled west together, and soon shared a home in Hollywood. They were billed on equal footing in movie bills, again a success for women before feminism. Among their friends were Charlie Chaplin, Rudolph Valentino, and Marion Davies. Murfin also remained friends with Anita Loos and Frances Marion, whom she had known in New York. Murfin was so devoted to Strongheart, she even wrote a 1924 editorial for the Los Angeles Times discussing the importance of treating animals well on set, and mentioning the Trimble Murfin Productions' habit of hiring someone from the Animal Defense League to oversee the making of the film, ensuring that no animals would be harmed. This was key in a time when hundreds of horses were killed in shooting, which you can learn about in the Francis X. Bushman video on this channel. Murfin was always recorded as being Strongheart's sole owner. When the dog had to stop performing after developing a tumor from burns received after falling on a Klieg light, Trimble's relationship with Murfin soured. Perhaps he blamed her for the dog's injury. We just don't know. Trimble immediately started up another relationship with Bradley King around 1921 or 1912, records differ, and when that relationship too ended, he quit film and moved to an island on the St. Lawrence River, to train dogs. Bradley King, born August 4, 1894, and dying August 24, 1977, was the pen name of Josephine McLaughlin. She was supposedly 18 when she had her relationship with Trimble in 1912. She was a screenwriter who wrote 56 scripts for films between 1920 and 1947. All but one of her 40 silent films are lost, but most of her 20 or so sound films still exist. King was a Catholic and educated at the Convent of the Sacred Heart in Albany, New York. By 1916 she was writing scenarios under her own name at the Lubin Manufacturing Company in Philadelphia. Then in 1918 began to author love stories for prominent magazines under the name Bradley King. King recalled she entered the business after selling a few short stories to pulp magazines, and arranged a meeting with silent-era filmmaker Thomas Ince. "I've read some of your stuff and I think your literary style is absolutely lousy," she later recounted in saying. "But you've got a good sense of drama, and I'll give you $50 a week." 5 years later, she was making $1,500 a week. She was married several times. One was a short marriage to silent film director John Griffith Ray, who died just 9 months after their October 1928 wedding when she was 34. After a later husband, George Hiram Boyd, who she married in 1930 after meeting him in Honolulu, lost most of her $400,000 fortune, $8.4 million today, to bad investments. She divorced him in 1940. She wrote her last screenplay for the 1947 movie That's My Man and disappeared at age 53. She had been having poor health. Her only major extant silent movie, Anna Christie, 1923, starring Blanche Sweet, who you can learn about on this channel, has been forgotten in favor of the 1930 Greta Garbo remake. She was never heard from again, and there is no known record of her death, however it is cited as occurring in 1977. Ever attracted to screenwriters, Trimble eventually returned to Hollywood and would marry Marion Constance Blackton, according to the 1999 obituary of Jan Trimble's Eliacus written by Kevin Brownlow. Blackton would die in 1993, and her marriage to Trimble lasted until his death. Blackton grew up on film sets, thanks to her father's career, and knew early on that she wanted to get into the industry for herself. "Location trips with my father's company were my idea of heaven," she once remarked. She got her start as a script girl for her father's films at Vitagraph before establishing a name for herself via her adapted screenplays. She used her position to change the way women were being portrayed at the company. They began to show some guts. They stopped fluttering. "In short, they stopped being my father's ideal woman," she'd later write. Strongheart scenarios ranged from Murfin's original stories to adaptations of famous books about dogs, such as White Fang. At the height of Strongheart's popularity, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and had a collected book of fan letters printed. Tragically, most of Strongheart's films are now believed to be lost. However, a print of The Love Master, 1924, featuring Strongheart and Lady Jewel, Strongheart's leading lady on and off-screen, recently surfaced at Archives du Film du CNC in Bois d'Arcy, France, and his final film, The Return of Boston Blackie, 1927 or 1929, which was not written or directed by either Trimble or Murfin, exists at George Eastman House in New York. Concerned about getting proper credit for film work, in 1921 Murfin became one of the founding members of the Screenwriters Guild. In 1933, when the Guild was reformed as the Writers Guild of America, Murfin was asked by her friends Marion Davies, Anita Loos, and Bess Meredith to write the original rules and guidelines, see Beecham 1997, 307. Her 1955 Los Angeles Times obituary lists Murfin as serving on numerous boards throughout her life, including the Board of Directors for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Murfin continued to work steadily in the industry during the sound era. Later, she would become RKO's first female supervisor and a producer at MGM, as the Los Angeles Times reported in 1931. She would also marry the actor Donald Crisp in 1932, when she was 48. Unfortunately, Donald Crisp was a prolific liar. Donald Crisp was born George William Crisp in Bow, London, in a family home on the 27th of July, 1882. He was the youngest of 10 children, 4 boys and 6 girls, born to Elizabeth, née Christie, and James Crisp, a laborer. He was educated locally and in 1901 was living with his parents and working as a driver of a horse-drawn vehicle. Oscar winner Crisp made a number of claims about his early life that were eventually proven false decades after his death. He claimed that he was born in 1880 in Aberfeldy in Perthshire, Scotland, and even went so far as to maintain a Scottish accent throughout his life in Hollywood. In fact, he had no connections to Scotland, but in 1996, a plaque commemorating him was unveiled by Scottish comedian Jimmy Logan in Crisp's supposed hometown of Aberfeldy. He claimed on alternative occasions that his father was a cattle farmer, a country doctor or a royal physician to King Edward VII. He also claimed that he was educated at Eton and Oxford, and that he served as a trooper in the 10th Hussars in the Boer War. While traveling on the SS Carmania to the United States in July 1906, Crisp's singing talents during a ship's concert caught the attention of opera impresario John C. Fisher, who immediately offered him a job with his company. One has to remember England has a strong history of singing, in church and in school, compared to the United States. Crisp spent his first year in New York City in the Grand Opera, and the following year as a stage director. It was while touring with the company in the United States and Cuba that Crisp first became interested in the theater. By 1910, Crisp, now using the name Donald, he retained George as a middle name, was working as a stage manager for the renowned entertainer, composer, playwright, Jewish blackface enthusiast and director George M. Cohen. It was during this time he met and befriended film director D.W. Griffith. When Griffith ventured west to seek his fortune in Hollywood in 1912 from New York, Crisp accompanied him. From 1908 to 1930, Crisp, in addition to directing dozens of films, also appeared in nearly 100 silent films, though many in bit or small parts. One notable exception was his casting by Griffith as General Ulysses S. Grant in Griffith's landmark film The Birth of a Nation in 1915. Another was his role in Griffith's 1919 film Broken Blossoms as Battling Burroughs, the brutal and abusive father of the film's heroine, Lucy Burroughs, played by Lillian Gish. The actress was only 11 years his junior. Crisp worked as an assistant to Griffith for several years and learned much during this time from Griffith, an early master of film storytelling who was influential in advancing a number of early techniques, such as cross-cutting in editing his films. This experience fostered a similar passion in Crisp to become a director in his own right. His first directing credit was Little Country Mouse, made in 1914. Many directors and actors would find themselves turning out a dozen or more films in a single year at this time. Over the next 15 years, Crisp directed some 70 films in all, most notably The Navigator, 1924, with Buster Keaton and Don Q, Son of Zorro, 1925, with Douglas Fairbanks. When asked later by an interviewer why he eventually gave up directing and returned full-time to acting, Crisp commented that directing had become extremely wearisome because he was so often called upon, if not forced, to do favors for studio chiefs by agreeing to employ their relatives in his films, and the favoritism bothered him. His final directorial effort was the film The Runaway Bride, 1930. Between working for Griffith and other producers, along with his many acting roles, Crisp managed to return to the UK, serving in British Army intelligence during the First World War. Crisp became an American citizen in 1930. During the Second World War he served in the United States Army Reserve, attaining the rank of colonel. With the advent of talkies, Crisp abandoned directing and devoted himself entirely to acting after 1930. He became a much sought-after character actor. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, he appeared in a wide range of roles alongside some of the era's biggest stars, including Katharine Hepburn in The Little Minister, 1934, and A Woman Rebels, 1936, Charles Lawton and Clark Gable in Mutiny on the Bounty, 1935, Betty Davis and Henry Fonda in That Certain Woman, 1937, and Jezebel, 1938, Laurence Olivier in Wuthering Heights, 1939, Errol Flynn in The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, 1939, and The Sea Hawk, 1940, and Gregory Peck in The Valley of Decision, 1945. In what proved to be the first of a successful series of films for MGM, Lassie Come Home, 1943, featured Crisp in a touching performance as a destitute Yorkshire coal miner unable to provide food for the titular collie his young son, Roddy McDowell, loved so deeply. It's possible this dog-loving role was encouraged by Murfin, reminiscing about her Strongheart days. A versatile supporting actor, Crisp could be equally good in lovable or sinister roles. During the same period he was playing loving father figures or charming old codgers in classic films like National Velvet and Lassie Come Home. He also turned in a well-received performance as Commander Beach, the tormented presumptive grandfather in Lewis Allen's The Uninvited, 1944. Undoubtedly, however, Crisp's most memorable role was as the taciturn but loving father in How Green Was My Valley, 1941, directed by John Ford. The film received 10 Oscar nominations, winning 5, including Best Picture, with Crisp winning the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor in 1942. Crisp was an active and important liaison between the film industry and outside business interests. His extensive experience in business, the military and entertainment, including being a production and studio executive, lent itself well to this task. He became a highly valued advisor whose clear-headed forward-thinking proved invaluable to the Bank of America, which was one of the leading sources of working capital for the film industry for many years, an industry whose lifeblood was loans. He was invited to be the director of the Bank of Italy as well. In this we see the remarkable start to a trend Hollywood used to fill globalist positions across the world in the death vacuum after World War II. Crisp served on the bank's advisory board for several decades, including a stint as its chairman. In this role, he had the ear of its board of directors, and many of the films eventually financed by the bank during the 1930s and 1940s got their most important approval from Crisp. In 1944, Crisp and Murfin were divorced. She had been described as a screenwriter in their wedding notice. Crisp eventually became one of the more wealthy members of the film industry. His so-called banker's sobriety, extensive contacts and clarity of thought allowed him to make good investments, particularly in the real estate market. He continued to appear in films throughout the 1950s and into the early 1960s. During more than half a century as an actor, he appeared in as many as 402 reel and feature-length productions, perhaps a great deal more. John Carradine, who counted over 500 films to his own credit, the Internet Movie Database records over 300, told his son Keith, who repeated the story during a 2018 Gilbert Gottfried podcast, that only Donald Crisp had appeared in more movies. Crisp's final screen role was as Grandpa Spencer alongside former film co-stars Henry Fonda and Maureen O'Hara in the 1963 film Spencer's Mountain. This film, adapted from the novel by Earl Hamner, Jr., was the basis for the 1970s television series The Waltons. Crisp was in his 80s by the time he quit acting entirely, continuing to work long after it was financially necessary simply because he enjoyed it. He was married 3 times. In 1912, he married actress Helen Peace, and they remained together until her death the following year, aged just 23. In 1917, he married Marie Stark, whom he divorced in 1920. She went on to act in silent films as Marie Crisp. In 1932, he married film screenwriter Jane Murfin, whom he divorced in 1944. He died in 1974, a few months short of his 92nd birthday, due to complications from a series of strokes. Crisp spent the final years of his life at the motion picture Country House and Hospital, which he, himself had helped to establish years before. In addition to being one of the premier character actors of his era, he left behind an extensive list of contributions to the film industry he worked to promote for more than 50 years. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Glendale, California. He was a staunch Republican who campaigned for Thomas Dewey in 1944. On February 8, 1960, Crisp received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for his contributions to the motion pictures industry at 1628 Vine Street. Murfin would gain even greater prominence in the 1930s and 40s while she was married to Crisp. Cowl writing scripts for What Price Hollywood, 1932, The Women, 1939, Pride and Prejudice, 1940, and numerous other films. Before there was the Lady Gaga remake of A Star Is Born, there was the 1937 original A Star Is Born, written by Dorothy Parker. Before that, there was What Price Hollywood, 1932, written by Jane Murfin and Adela Rogers St. John's, which earned a Best Writing, Original Story nomination for the 2 female screenwriters at that year's Academy Award ceremony. She died in 1955 at the age of 70. Her former lover Trimble had died in 1954. Few Hollywood history books ever reference the name Jane Murfin even though she had a prolific career. The best Murfin adaptation I've seen is Double Harness. What is your favorite?